so surreal to be back. I'm going to start with a little water. Had a little too much wine at dinner, so things haven't really changed since I was MFA. But yeah, Noah's Wife was my MFA thesis. The passage that some of you may have read in the packet, the prologue, was what I read at my senior second year thesis reading. And I told my fellow writers here I was going to speak spontaneously, but I don't actually really do anything spontaneously, so I'm going to read you the notes that I wrote down in the room while they were all out walking. That was, the prologue was my MFA thesis reading, and that has remained largely untouched in the 6 years since. But the rest of the thesis underwent multiple and sometimes very painful transformations before it settled into the shape it has today. I had the good fortune to find an agent fairly quickly and an editor not too long after that, but it turned out that my editor liked the idea of the book more than she liked the book itself, which I didn't really realize at the time. I had just met my now husband. We were in our second week of dating. He brought me the contract where we were working at the summer camp and brought a little bottle of champagne, and he was like, "Soon we'll be celebrating with a box of your books." And that was in June of 2011. The book came out in January of this year, so it took a while. People ask me like who he is in the book, but I'm like, the book was there long before he was, so he's not in it. And really, my editor was right. The book was really a series of loosely linked character sketches when I began. And if I had to describe it, I think I'd say it was a bunch of really charming, eccentric characters walking around and talking to each other while it was raining, which I thought was wonderful, but apparently wouldn't really sell in a New York house. So, as I learned from my editor, the novel lacked conflict, tension, plot. What else did she say? I have it here. A protagonist that readers could understand and root for. So, I don't know why she bought it, but she did. Noah's Wife was finally published in January after 5 years of intensive revisions and rewrites. Much changed, but much remained the same. And I'm going to read a selection of brief passages that showcase, I hope, the prose style and the emphasis on character that have been at the heart of the novel from the very beginning. So, we'll start with just a little bit of the prologue, which again, some of you may have read. I just started teaching in this MFA program this past summer, and I was reading some writer's advice to sound more wiser to my students. And one of the pieces of advice, or two of them, were don't start with a prologue and don't start with the weather. But here's my prologue about the weather. In the beginning it was not raining, but it is raining now and steadily. It has been raining for so long that even though it has not always been raining, the townspeople begin to feel as though this is the case, as though the weather has always been this way, the sky this gray, the puddles this profound. They feel sometimes as though the sun has never risen over their town at all, not ever, that its very existence is nothing but a rumor, a product of the same sort of fallacy and telescopic inaccuracy that had everyone thinking for so long that the world was flat or that the constellations were arranged in patterns. Skipping ahead a little. The water pours down roofs and rushes through gutters and falls in silver arcs from the eaves to the ground. It collects between the cracks in the sidewalk and then spreads in pools across the pavement. The townspeople postpone school picnics and town parades, put away their bicycles, carve ditches through their lawns, take baseball bats to knock the rust from their cars. They purchase special light boxes from a mail-order catalog because the description promises that the bulbs will cheer them by simulating the sun. They collect ponchos and rain boots and wear them with self-conscious style. They learn how to walk two abreast on the sidewalk while carrying open umbrellas. The trick is in the tilt, a slight movement of the elbow toward the side of one's body so that the spokes do not collide. How lovely the streets look with the colors of all the umbrellas, says Mrs. McGinn to her neighbors with a fierce and dogged optimism. How pleasant it is not to have to water our lawns or wash our cars. In short, they adapt. They are in fact surprised to find how fluid their lives are. They are surprised to discover how easy it is to make these alterations, how simple it is to shift their daily habits to fill the empty spaces and restore balance. Weeks become months and years. By the time the new minister arrives in town with his bird-like wife, it seems as if it has been raining forever. There really is a certain beauty in it, isn't there? Exclaims the wife, examining the jeweled drops that cling to the window panes. She looks attentively to her husband. My cup runneth over, says the minister, watching the water tumble out and over the edge of a brimming gauge. His voice is hard and bright. So that's from the prologue. It's written in 40 chapters, and each chapter is from a specific perspective. So in chapter 2, we get the perspective of Mrs. McGinn, the town matriarch, who's observing the new minister and his wife. 2 days before Noah was called to this church, the previous minister walked into the river and didn't walk out again. When Noah arrives to take his place, the town is still debating the nature of his death. It is true, people say to one another, that after so many months of rain, the river has become higher and faster than it was before. And yet it has not become so high or so fast that anyone would have expected death by drowning to be a very real possibility. This is a town of strong swimmers. Then again, as Mrs. McGinn observes in hushed tones to her daughter on the morning of the burial, one can die just as well in 2 feet of water as in 20. It's a fairly simple matter once a person sets his troubled mind to it, and everyone knows that's exactly what the poor man was, troubled. God rest his soul. It is a blessing at least to have the town cemetery on the high ground behind the church. Most of the townspeople grumble about having to slosh up the muddy hill in their worn-out galoshes, but Mrs. McGinn is glad to do it, because she is determined to get a better look at the new minister and his wife. She only caught a glimpse of them through the foggy windows of their car as they rolled through town last night. The woman looked beautiful, Mrs. McGinn admits to herself, but she is hoping that the beauty of the minister's wife will turn out to be something like the beauty of a fine impressionist painting. Lovely in certain lights, and best when seen from farther away, but a muddle of colors and textures when one stands with one's nose right up against the gilded frame. It has been years since Mrs. McGinn was in an art museum. Whatever museums this town once had have long since closed up shop and taken their objects elsewhere. But there was once a time when she was quite interested in art, and she likes to think she still knows a thing or two about beauty. We're going to switch over to the perspective of the zookeeper, who is engaged to Mrs. McGinn's daughter. That'd be a very different kind of name. It's not. Okay. The zookeeper became a zookeeper in the first place, because even though he doesn't like animals much at all, he likes people even less. He finds animals dull and people tiresome, and the only person he can bear to be around for more than 10 minutes at a time is Mrs. McGinn's daughter. If truth be told, as the zookeeper always believes it should be, she has her faults. For example, she sneezes all the time. Her toes turn slightly in. As an only child, she is aggressively competitive. She talks with food in her mouth. Finally, and not least, her mother has instilled in her a sense of distrust toward the world in general, and lovers in particular, that the zookeeper has had to work hard to overcome. If ever he speaks too long to a pretty visitor at the zoo, these are few and far between these days, to one of his female neighbors, even to a woman of the McGinn's own clan, he will catch in his fiancée's eye the same fierce gleam that he sees in the eyes of wolves or predatory cats. He is not afraid of much, but sometimes he is afraid of her. They do their rounds together. Mrs. McGinn's daughter takes great pleasure in feeding the penguins. They are exotic, comically formal, and monogamous. At the tank, she remarks upon this fact, and her hard face softens, her eyes warming to her favorite subject. "Tell me the others," she insists, dipping a hand again into her pail. "You know, the animals who mate for life." "Gibbons, swans, bald eagles," he says automatically, rattling off the list that he has rattled off 100 times before. "Wolves, termites, beavers, pigeons, prions." "Prairie voles, black vultures," she continues. Her tongue trips lightly over the names, and her tone rises and falls as if in song. "That's right," he says. He doesn't mind these pointed reminders of hers. As the daughter of a revolving set of fathers, perhaps it is only to be expected that she find comfort in stories of successful relationships and in the knowledge that the animal world is not completely devoid of constancy. There is such a thing, he is slowly training her to believe, as fidelity. Not quite a spoiler, but it keeps raining, the zoo floods. The townspeople think it's a great idea to take the animals into their homes because there's not much else they can do. It's at Noah's urging, and so this is a short scene with Noah's wife in the house with the animals, thanks to Noah's great plan. And so she busies herself with the beasts that Noah brought into their house. The woodchuck burrowing beneath the quilts in the guest bedroom, the badger snoring in his crate. One of the bathrooms has been transformed into a reptile house, with an orphaned baby alligator half submerged in the bathtub, and a tank of lizards sunning by the glow of a light box on the back of the toilet. The one-winged golden eagle surveys the backyard from her perch in the dining room, keeping her eye on the pens with the wild boars, the zebra, and the sheep. In the morning before Noah's wife leaves, and at night when she returns, she makes the rounds around the house and yard with buckets of feed hanging from her wrists, the slender red fox trotting at her heels, and her husband nowhere to be seen. Perhaps it is better, she tries to convince herself, that she is doing this on her own. How terrible Noah is with the animals. He draws too close to them, he reaches out too quickly when he tries to touch them, and it seems as though every evening she is patching up some new wound. The barricades that he arranges while she is away, chairs, tables, lamps, have not proven successful in keeping the species contained in their assigned spaces. The animals simply do not like him. Within their first few hours with the flamingo, the bird attacked Noah twice, and would have done so again if they had not given her up to Liesl. Just yesterday, Noah's wife found Noah in a confrontation with a saddle-billed stork, 5 feet high, sharp-beaked, bad-tempered. Her husband trying to scare the bird away by pressing a spatula to its feathered chest. The stork didn't budge. When Noah's wife saw the patches around his beak turning red with anger, something the zookeeper had advised her to watch for, she swiftly stepped between them, took the spatula from Noah, and ushered the bird into the basement. They have heard him cackling through the heating ducts ever since. There's also the Italian expatriate Mauro, who takes in the peacocks. That's in chapter 24. Ever since taking in the peacocks, Mauro has adopted a more stately way of walking. Sometimes when the townspeople step outside to glare at the sky or empty their rain gauges, they see him following the birds through the streets. The peacocks move slowly forward, tails closed tight as clasped fans, and Mauro struts behind them with his stubbled chin up, his chest out, and one of their feathers tucked with a handkerchief into the front pocket of his button-down shirt. If he stops to say hello to a neighbor and the birds lose sight of him, they take great bustling strides around corners until they find him again, flaring their tails in an explosion of turquoise passion. The sudden appearance of so many feathered eyes used to startle Mauro as much as it still startles his neighbors, but he has since become accustomed to these brilliant displays of affection. And the final passage I'll read is from chapter 35. We're getting near the end here. Noah's wife is having a kind of moment of revelation. She remembers her neighbors, their animals, her fox curled up on the love seat at her feet. She thinks of Noah in the little wooden gazebo, standing behind the makeshift curtain at this very moment with his arms folded across his chest, the skeleton keys tucked within the cuffs of his shirt. It was not so long ago when she thought that he walked with God, when she believed that he possessed a kind of power and authority that no one else ever would, that there was a call in the world that could be heard by him alone. And yet here is the revelation that has been creeping up on her over all those long gray days as the rain drummed against her shoulders and slid into her boots. There is nothing special about him at all. Nothing heroic, nothing superhuman, nothing divine. He is as fragile as anyone, as frail and as brokenly human as she is, as all the rest of them are. And yet, she realizes with some surprise, struck by the force of the emotion, she loves him all the same. What the weatherman is saying is far too simple. The townspeople do not deserve a watery fate any more than she does or Noah does. No one asked for the rain. No one wanted the old minister to walk into the river or Dr. Yu's mother to fall ill. No couple wants their son to meet his death on the road before he has a chance to finish high school. Although it is true that Noah's wife has endured her own fair share of loss, she has spent most of her adulthood marveling over her happiness and asking herself what she ever did to deserve someone like Noah. And yet the truth she sees now is that people do not deserve their good fortune any more than they deserve their heartache. A person's fate simply comes to her, unbidden, a white dove in the dark, and her only task is to accept it, to reach out and make it her own. Thank you.